Hello, this is Edith Newmeyer, and I am the author of the book The Mystery of Adam. I want to continue my topic on the Antichrist spirit. In my previous videos, I showed quite a lot how that Antichrist spirit distorted the Israelites and the Jews, and how they were misled to follow God and, of course, Messiah. And so I right now are starting to look at how the church was affected by this Antichrist spirit. Because of course the church was not perfect. Everybody is fallen creatures. And so right now I'm doing more like a transition between coming from, let's say, Judaism, and I will explain that in a little bit, to kind of Christianity, and I will explain that too, because when we have these two names, Christianity and Judaism, they are filled with a lot of assumptions and beliefs. And so if I say Judaism, then it is not a correct word, because by the time I have showed that in my last video, that and I actually wrote down now the man who did the study. This guy Matthew Vander did a book review, okay, that I listened to, and it showed very, very much the development of Judaism since like after the exile, when they came back from the Babylonian exile to the time of Jesus. And the book that he used, or one of the books he used, was by Shaye. It's Shaye, Shaye Cohen. And the book was called From the Maccabees to the Mishnah. Okay, so it probably took a little longer, described the development a little longer, not just Jesus' time, but this Matthew did it to Jesus' time. And so that was, I didn't say very much last time, and I hope that people had a chance to watch his video, Matthew's video, and get a good understanding about this history, because it was so interesting. This history showed clearly, this research showed clearly that after the Babylonian, especially after the Babylonian exile, so when they came back from the exile in Babylonia, that the culture and the religion of the Jews changed tremendously. Okay, they were still not, they still did not have their own country or their own land, because they were still under Persian captivity, or captivity really. They were under the Persian Empire and under Persian rule. And so then when the Persians fell and Alexander the Great, the Greek, took over, and Judea was still not independent. But something very terrible happened during that time, that the religion of the Jews was very much influenced by the Hellenistic culture, so by the Greek culture. Not only by probably the culture, but the culture was shaped by their philosophers. If you know Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Socrates, and all these philosophers, okay, that now became a foothold, okay, in the educated elite, of the Jews. So that influenced how they interpreted Torah. Okay, so we talked about that in some of my videos, that they had this oral law, but this oral law, so that was the interpretation of Torah, was influenced by the Hellenistic culture. And so this belief, this religious belief, okay, was extremely now changed from this Torah observance to um, just something different. He said that a lot of the Jews didn't even come back to um, Judea. They stayed in Babylonia. Most people stayed in Babylonia. They didn't even return. So only a small group returned to Jerusalem and started building the temple. Some even stayed in Egypt, Alexandria. Some stayed in Rome. So they didn't even all come back. So because of that, their religious practices changed very radically. And we can see that, of course, during Jesus's time, how they were influenced. And I've said that all the time in my book. I said that very much, that the Jews were totally influenced by the cultures around them. And so they ended up not really having pure Torah anymore, but they ended up having a totally different religion that was nothing but ritualistic and built on tradition. And some of the traditions may have not even been Torah traditions. So therefore, I have a hesitant to use that name Judaism, because by the time Jesus came, Judaism was not really the same practices as, for instance, the people did when they left, or when they first entered the promised land. Let's say the practices of David, okay, David and the judges. It totally changed. It just totally changed everything. And we know how much that the Jews always strayed from God. Well, they did the same thing when they came back from the Babylonian captivity. They did the same thing. They intermarried. They adapted, especially to the Hellenistic culture, very, very strongly. So all their, or most of their, probably most, were influenced, most of their rabbis and the Pharisee system, the high priest system, was very influenced by Hellenistic thinking. Matter of fact, this book is talking about the Maccabees. The Maccabees, okay, starting from the Maccabees time, and everybody says Maccabees, right? Um, but starting from this Maccabees time, the high priest took over the leadership of Israel, okay, or not Israel, but the Jews in Judea. And so it became in the hands of the Pharisees and the high priests to lead the people, which was totally against what God's instructions were. And they never had a king again, according to the lineage of David, never. And so again, what they ended up with, they called it Judaism, but it was not true Torah observant. It was not true observant of Torah and the prophet. They already strayed away quite a lot. So the transition that I was talking about in my last video, and I used that, the transition from Judaism to Christianity, is probably not the correct thing. I think transition is not the right thing either. Because really what happened, and it has nothing to do with Judaism, it has something to do with the original Torah observance. The Torah observance not changed, but transformed into something new. And that's why I'm bringing it up, because I talked about this Hebrew roots movement that I say is really not a good a very good movement. Okay, it really kind of leads astray from what's really going on. Okay, because a transformation happened from Torah observance to now the church. Okay, and I'm not going to use Christianity either. I think the right word is church or the church age. Okay, it was a transformation. I already used, for instance, last time Jesus said, you don't put new wine in old skins. Okay, you put new wine into new skins. Why? Because it just doesn't mix very well. But I'm going to use a different analogy or symbol today, how this transformation looked like. It was the transformation more, you could probably use like the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly. That's the transformation. Here we have this caterpillar who is symbolizing Torah observant, okay? Torah observant, which is the old, and this caterpillar goes into a cocoon and it comes out as a butterfly. That's the way I see it. It was more a transformation of Torah observant to the church, and exactly the way it is like a, they call it what, metamorphosis, what it is. Okay, so you have this caterpillar goes into the cocoon, the same stuff that made up the caterpillar now goes into this mush inside, and it totally transforms into this butterfly, comes out as a butterfly, and that's exactly what's really happening. And that is why we cannot go back to observing Torah anymore. We can't do that because Torah was transformed. Jesus fulfilled Torah and he transformed Torah in something absolutely, absolutely new. And when we die with him, it's also like another analogy we can use is a seed. Okay, a seed. When a seed falls into the ground, that seed dies. And out of that seed comes a new sprout, and something new comes out. Okay, that's what it is. Can we go back to being a seed? Well, if we go back to being a seed, then we are not this new creation that comes out of the sprout. And Jesus, again, also shows that over and over again in his parables, that we need to be transforming. We need to die as a seed and come out as something new. Okay? That is something he's saying. If we're not dying, okay, if we're not being put to the ground, that's actually what baptism symbolizes. We're being put to death and something else comes out of that seed. Okay? So we have to be put to death in order to come out as something new. And that's a good analogy as well. So I hope that kind of makes sense and also kind of explains why it is not a good thing to go back and to Torah observant. We are now living in a different time. Okay, we're now living in church time. Okay, and we had to go through this transition. Now, I said last time that the first apostles and disciples of Jesus, they still were in the cocoon. They still did not develop into that butterfly. Okay, now Paul showed them how it looks like when you develop into the butterfly, because he got that instruction, of what it takes to be this butterfly. But the early apostles, like for instance, James, who was a pillar, in the church of Jerusalem, they didn't get it yet. Okay, they were still in that cocoon where they were still have caterpillar and not quite butterfly yet. And so this is exactly what happened. Okay, or they were in the ground still in this seed that's just sprouting, but the sprout has not come out, and you couldn't see, the plant yet. That's exactly, I believe, what happened, with the early church. So now we're in this. Yeah, you can say it's a transition, but it's more in this transformation that's happening. Okay, it took a while for this church to develop, and until we really saw very well how the church should function. And that's all we had is Paul's writing, especially in the Bible. That's all we have. We have Paul's writing, we have some of Peter and John, and the Hebrew letter, to kind of see how this transformation was supposed to be going on, and to make us understand what was behind really Torah. Okay, but they finally got it. But it was a struggle. And I believe very early on, the adversary came into the church to not even allow it to flourish, okay, to kill that caterpillar that was inside the cocoon, or to um, destroy the little seed that is starting to sprout. Oh, Satan was right there, okay, and he even used the Jews, okay, the Judaizers. I call them Judaizers because that's what John called them. He used the Judaizers to really infiltrate the church, to destroy it from the inside out. So we see that if I read, remember I mentioned this book last time, the Lost Books of the Bible, and I read about Clement and Barnabas, and especially Clement wrote a letter to the Corinthians because they had difficulties, continuing to have difficulties, which they had during Paul's time, but they continue to have difficulties, and these difficulties did not stop. So we know that in the beginning, the church really struggled, and there was no cohesive thing in the church. It's they all struggle, and they had all different, I want to say, leaders. Okay, we don't have anything clear cut, and that's kind of sad, because we don't have anything clear cut and say, okay, this is the way it is. We have some of Paul's writings, but it was still very difficult. And of course, again, yeah, we're saying the God reached the Gentiles, but not very many Gentiles were reached. It flourished, but again, like that seed that was supposed to go into the ground and sprout, well, lots of times that little seed didn't sprout. Okay, it did not sprout. It was killed from the beginning. It was thrown on the wrong ground. That parable of Jesus, that a sower went out and sowed the seed, and some fell on good ground, some fell on rocky ground, some fell on just ground that was just not very deep, and so the seed um, did all kinds of stuff. And see, so then some seed went into the good ground, and it flourished. It changed. It transformed. And so that is what happened to the early church as well. It's not just, and I did a lot of pointing out how much the Jews and the Israelites went astray. But it happened the same thing with the Gentiles. Okay, the Gentiles were the same way. They went astray as well. So it's not like this big thing about, the Gentiles were better than the Jews. No, we are all fallen creatures, and we all are not looking. That's what Paul said in Romans. We are all as sinners, all of us. Okay, there's only a few that God really reaches, and points out to them, and they're following Him. Only a few. There's not that many. Now we think that, oh, Christianity is so big. Now let me tell you something about Christianity, because I said Christianity is really not the right word either. And the reason why it is not the right word, because under this umbrella of Christianity, we have so many different kinds of denominations, and so many different kinds of beliefs, that when you say, well, I'm a Christian, really, you don't know what that means. Okay? That can mean quite a lot of things. That can mean, oh, I'm just going to following these guidelines, of whatever the church said. Okay? So it doesn't necessarily mean somebody is actually following Jesus. Okay? In the footsteps of Jesus. Does not mean that. Okay? We have so many people that are just saying, well, I'm a Christian, but they're not really following Jesus. So Christianity for me is a word that, I don't know, I'm careful to say I use it because that's what I'm used to saying, but I'd rather use a different way. Now, in the early days, the early churches, okay, they didn't call them Christians, and I don't remember when they say in Antioch they were called Christians first, um, but in the early church, they were called the followers of the way. That's what Christians were called. Okay? The followers of the way, because he was the way, the truth, and the life. Okay? So that's why they were called the followers of the way. And maybe that would be a better name. But we will investigate that, what happened, with the church, and how the church, again, was just as corrupted as the Torah belief was. Let's say Torah belief, right? It was just as corrupted, and it's still corrupted today. Judaism today is extremely corrupt today. They are not really observing Torah. They can't observe Torah because, again, 85% depends on the temple, and so therefore it can't be observed. And it's interesting that I'm talking about the temple. This Matthew guy, watch him. He does some good research, but I'm questioning him some things. He's saying, oh, he believes the temple will be built, during Jesus's time, and all these rituals will be brought back. I mean, he has absolutely no understanding of the church age, that we are the temple, that God wants a living temple. He did not understand that. So that's why it just like, ooh, what are you talking about? It just curls my, I don't know, my spine or something. It just rubs me the wrong way, to say, when somebody says, oh, the temple will be rebuilt. There may be a temple, a house, but right now we are the temple. I made that very clear. We are the temple right now, and that's what we need to invest in right now, is the temple we have, the church, not just our temple, but the temple as a whole, as the church, all the believers, all the members of the believers. I'm not talking about believers, okay? Because most of our churches today, and I've said that so many times, they're not churches according to the original intent, which was given to Paul. I have talked about that, and if you want to go back to that section, go back to that section, because I don't want to talk too much about the original intent of the church. I think who comes pretty close is, like I told you already, is the organic church. people. They call it an organic church movement. I think they come with the closest to understanding what church is today. It's not this hierarchy that we have in the church, you know, but it's more a fellowship um, rather than a hierarchy. But that changed very much, you know, from the beginning. Okay, from the beginning, it seems it didn't take any time for these leaders to come into the church and to take over and turn it into a hierarchy. Okay, now I'm reading Clement's letters because Clement, of course, was the Bishop of Rome, and you know, I don't see a hierarchy in his letters, but I believe that kind of continued, you know, with even the apostles, and because a lot has to be changed to make people understand that there is no hierarchy, you know, in the body. There is no hierarchy in the body, and again, I think Paul is the one that really got the understanding of how this church ought to function. But again, very early that was changed. Very early. I would think the generation after Clement, okay, after, and I mentioned Barnabas last week, because that's the generation, that's the next generation uh, um, after Paul, okay. That generation, again, you had most likely people bringing in the hierarchy into the church and somebody controlling everything. And people, again, like sheep, did not continue to think on their own. I guess people never do think on their own. So we're definitely not different. And so this antichrist spirit could definitely come in the church. Antichrist spirit, when I'm talking about antichrist spirit, is not necessarily that they started believing that Jesus Christ is not God in the flesh, but also that now they are hindering people from fully living in that truth. That is also antichrist spirit. See, the antichrist spirit not only wants to destroy Messiah, but that antichrist spirit also wants to destroy us from living a life for Messiah. Okay? That's also what the antichrist spirit is. And we will see that very, very strongly. So he wants to destroy, you know, the church. And very early, the wolves came. You know, John said it, and he probably wrote his um, letters and revelation at the end of his life. So that may have been 100, that could have been 100 or 90 BC when he wrote those. And he already knew that the Antichrist spirit is coming, and that there were already Antichrists that were infiltrating, you know, the church and trying to just deceive and mislead the people in the church. So I'm going to stop though today, because I want to continue next time, moving on to this antichrist spirit in the church. And I will probably talk about Constantine next time, how Constantine caused this church to even stray more and just totally destroy the intent that the Holy Spirit showed Paul. All right, well, anyways, I will finish up today and keep studying, and I will talk to you soon.